My name is Emmett Callahan. For 15 years, I've worked as a fire tower lookout in the Montana wilderness. When the first infected appeared, I was 78 days into my rotation, watching the world collapse through my spotting scope. From 100 feet above, the tree line, I witnessed the first 30 days of the zombie apocalypse while others died below. This is how I survived when isolation became my salvation. Before we start the video, let us know what country you are tuning in from in the comment section below. Perhaps we will make a story there. Let's begin. My name is Emmett Callahan. I need to get this down while I still can, while there's still someone out there who might hear it. I worked as a fire lookout at Echo Tower in the Montana wilderness for 15 years before everything happened. Fire watching is a dying profession, was a dying profession. Funny how things work out. I was 78 days into my 6-month rotation when the world fell apart. 78 days of peaceful isolation, just me and the mountains and the endless sky. Some people ask me if I regret being up here when it all went down. I tell them the truth. This tower saved my life. 100 feet above the tree line with 360 degrees of unobstructed visibility in every direction. I saw everything, every terrible moment of it. Let me back up. Fire lookouts live a specific kind of life. We're a certain breed. People who choose to spend 6 months at a time in a 14 by 14 foot cabin, perched atop a steel-framed tower in the middle of nowhere. No running water. Minimal electricity from solar panels. Just you, your supplies, your radio, and your eyes. The Forest Service has been phasing us out for years, replacing human lookouts with automated camera systems. Said we were obsolete. Funny how obsolete skills become priceless overnight. Before all this, my routine was simple. Wake up at sunrise, check weather readings, scan the horizon with binoculars, looking for smoke plumes, radio in conditions to headquarters, monitor radio chatter, record observations in my log, repeat every hour until sunset. In between, I'd read books, maintain equipment, and listen to the natural rhythm of the forest. Every Tuesday, I'd have a scheduled check-in with regional headquarters. Every 2 weeks, a ranger would bring supplies. I chose this life after what happened back in Missoula. But that's another story for another time. It was July 15th, 2023. A Tuesday, check-in day. I remember because when headquarters didn't respond to my standard call, I noted it in my log. Unusual but not unprecedented. Radio interference happens in the mountains. I was tracking a thunderstorm, moving in from the northwest, still about 40 miles out. Good visibility otherwise. I noted a strange increase in traffic on the highways visible from my eastern viewpoint. Riverdale, the nearest town about 30 miles east, showed normal activity. That changed at 2:14 in the afternoon. The emergency broadcast system activated across all channels. In 15 years, I'd only heard test broadcasts. This was different. The message was terse, official. This is not a test. Shelter in place. Avoid contact with infected individuals. Wait for further instructions. It repeated 3 times before cutting to static. I logged it and continued scanning. That's when I noticed the traffic had stopped moving on the highway. Through my high-powered spotting scope, I could see people outside their vehicles. Something was wrong with the flow of movement. It looked chaotic, panicked. By 4:30, new emergency broadcasts were cutting across different frequencies. Some official, some clearly not. Reports of violence, attacks, in major cities. Medical emergencies. The word infected kept repeating. I started scanning Riverdale more carefully. There were disturbances downtown, visible even without magnification. By sunset, I watched police lights converging on the hospital. Then the power went out. Not just in sections, but the entire grid. Riverdale disappeared into darkness except for emergency generators at key buildings and what I assume were fires starting in at least 3 districts. I'd spent years watching for the smallest smoke plume. Never imagined I'd watch entire towns burn with no one to call. That first night, I documented everything. Every transmission, every visible disturbance. The conflicting reports painted a fractured picture. Some kind of rapid infection causing extreme aggression, hospitals overwhelmed, infrastructure failing, military mobilization. Through my scope, I could occasionally see muzzle flashes in Riverdale. Gunfire. Something was very wrong. I wasn't scared then. Not really. The tower had always been my refuge. 100 feet up with a retractable steel staircase. Solar power. Rainwater collection system. 4 months of emergency rations. A hunting rifle with ammunition. I was safer than most. By morning, the radio channels had devolved into chaos. Emergency services overwhelmed. People broadcasting their locations, begging for help. And then something new. Descriptions of the infected. Not just aggressive, but seemingly impervious to pain. Attacking in groups. Biting. And most disturbing of all, the dead getting back up. I dismissed these reports as panic, hysteria. People interpreting shocking violence through the lens of horror films. I've always been methodical, detached. Emotions cloud. Observation, so I documented, cataloged frequencies, noted patterns in the reports. The rational parts matched. Rapid infection rate, fever symptoms, aggression. The rest seemed impossible. Until day 6. I spotted a group of 5 hikers on the North Trail through my binoculars. Family group looked like. 2 adults, 3 children, with backpacks. They were moving quickly, purposefully, not casual hikers. Through my scope, I watched them encounter something on the trail ahead. At first, I thought it was another hiker. The figure moved strangely, lurching. When it reached the family, there was a struggle. One adult went down. The other grabbed the children and ran off-trail into the forest. I fired 3 warning shots from my rifle. An ethical violation under normal circumstances. You never fire warning shots in a wilderness area. But these weren't normal circumstances. The shots echoed across the valley. The remaining hikers disappeared into the tree line. But what I saw next confirmed everything. The fallen hiker got back up. Their movements were wrong, jerky, uncoordinated. They started following the same path the family had taken into the woods. And behind them, the figure that had attacked them joined in the pursuit. That was when I knew. What I was seeing wasn't mass hysteria or terrorism. It was something from nightmares. And from my tower, I had front row seats to the end of everything. By day 7, the radio channels had gone from chaos to sporadic transmissions to long stretches of nothing. I established a routine. Every hour, I'd scan the horizon in sections, documenting everything I saw. I inventoried my supplies obsessively. 4 months of dehydrated food if strictly rationed, water purification system functioning, solar panels, at 80% efficiency, satellite phone dead, radio operational but receiving fewer transmissions daily, rifle with 127 rounds remaining. I secured the tower by removing the upper section of the metal staircase, standard procedure during lightning storms, but now a security measure. No one was getting up without me lowering the access. I set up a signaling system using my signal, mirror, flashing patterns toward any movement that appeared human rather than infected. The isolation that had defined my career now protected me. I'd spent 15 years preparing for forest fires. Not once had I prepared for the forest to be safer than civilization. But I watched it happen. Through my scope, I observed the infected behaviors. They were attracted to sound, struggled with rough terrain, moved faster in groups. They followed paths of least resistance, roads, trails, cleared areas. And they were spreading from urban centers outward. I began categorizing them. Most moved with that distinctive shambling gait, but some, the fresher ones I suspected, could run in bursts. They didn't seem to tire. They didn't stop to rest or eat or drink. They just kept moving, driven by something I couldn't understand. On day 9, the first infected appeared at the base of my tower. A woman in what remained of a postal uniform. She must have followed the access road. I watched her through my binoculars, taking notes. No visible breathing. Eyes clouded, skin gray. She circled the tower base for hours before others joined her. By nightfall, there were 6. By morning, 11. I stopped using my battery-powered lantern at night. killed the generator except for essential equipment charging, moved like a ghost in my own home. The infected seemed to respond to the smallest sounds, vibrations. I'd catch them looking up sometimes, sensing something but not understanding. I thought isolation was my strength, until I realized isolation eventually just means you're surrounded with nowhere to go. Through my scope, I witnessed the full spectrum of human survival tactics. A family of 4 used the river to throw off pursuers, keeping to the shallows where the current wouldn't take them, but their scent would disperse. Smart. They made it past my field of vision heading north. A military convoy moved through the valley one night, lights off, moving slowly but deliberately. They had a destination, purpose. Then there were the others. A group of men forcing a woman at gunpoint to walk ahead as bait, drawing out infected, before they moved through an area. I watched her die screaming while they slipped past. I couldn't intervene, couldn't warn her. The weight of watching without the ability to help became its own kind of torture. From a distance you see the patterns people can't see from the ground. I started wondering if anyone could see me too. On day 12, everything changed. I was scanning emergency frequencies, a daily ritual that rarely yielded results. Anymore, a voice broke through the static, weak, distant, but undeniably human. Broadcasting on Emergency Channel 7. If anyone can hear this, respond. I hesitated. Operational security had kept me alive so far, but isolation was taking its toll. This is Fire Lookout Echo Tower responding to emergency broadcast. Identify yourself. The disbelief in their response was palpable. Holy shit, someone's actually up there? In that fire tower east of Miller's Ridge? Affirmative. Echo Tower is occupied and secure. Who am I speaking with? The voice belonged to a woman named Elaine, part of a survivor group of 11 people holed up in an old mining equipment warehouse about 20 miles southeast of my position. They'd been moving north for days, trying to reach the national forest, where they believed the infection would be less concentrated. We're stuck, she explained. Infected between us and the forest. Too many to fight through, we've got children with us. What's your exact position? I asked. She described landmarks I knew well from my vantage point. I swung my spotting scope to their location. The warehouse was partially visible between hills, and she was right. The most direct path to the forest was swarming with infected, at least 60 by my quick count. I can see you, I told her, and I can see the infected. But I can also see what you can't from down there. There's a path. If you head west 2 miles to the old railroad bridge, then follow the maintenance road north, you'll bypass the largest concentration. There's a group of about 10 infected by the bridge, but that's manageable with your numbers. The silence that followed was heavy. You can really see all that from up there? She finally asked. It's what I do. I watch, I observe, I report. Will you guide us? We'll maintain radio contact. You could be our eyes. For the first time since the world ended, I wasn't just a witness. I was a lighthouse. Their leader asked me a simple question that changed everything. Can you see a safe path for us? For the first time since the world ended, I wasn't just a witness. I was a lighthouse. I've spent my career watching for danger. Now people were asking me to watch for safety. The responsibility settled on my shoulders like a physical weight. But it gave me purpose beyond mere survival. I agreed to help them navigate to safety. I spent that night preparing, converting my weather and topographical maps into navigation tools, marking infected concentrations with timestamps, establishing communication protocols with Elaine's group. I created a system: green zones where no infected had been spotted for 24 hours, yellow for sporadic sightings, red for heavy concentration. The maps I'd used for years to track fire risk were now tracking a different kind of danger. Dawn of day 13 marked my first attempt at guiding survivors. I watched through my scope as Elaine's group emerged from the warehouse. 2-point people with makeshift weapons, followed by the main group in tight formation. 2 more armed, people bringing up the rear. They moved exactly as I instructed, quiet, deliberate, staying visible to my position whenever possible. Next intersection, turn west, I directed via radio. Hold at the corner. 3 infected moving north along your intended path. Wait for my signal. I counted the minutes as the infected shambled past their position. Clear. Move now. For 4 hours we repeated this pattern. Stop, wait, move. I guided them around concentrations too large to engage, directed them to eliminate isolated threats when necessary. When they reached the railroad bridge, the group of infected I'd spotted had grown to 13. Too many for direct confrontation. There's a maintenance shed 50 yards south of your position, I told them. 3 of you could create a distraction there while the rest crossed the bridge. I watched as they executed the plan. The diversion team broke a window, drawing the infected away from the bridge. The main group crossed safely. Then the diversion team used the shed's rear exit I'd spotted through my scope, circling back to rejoin the others. Not a single casualty. When they finally reached the forest edge, Elaine's voice cracked with emotion over the radio. We made it. Thank you, Watcher. Watcher, not my name, but an identity I embraced. Every successful journey made them trust me more. Trust is dangerous. When one mistake means death, word spread. By day 14, I'd made contact with 3 more survivor groups on different frequencies, each with their own challenges, their own desperate needs. A medical team trying to transport supplies between clinics. A family searching for a safe route to a rumored military extraction point. A pair of forest rangers with detailed knowledge of the backcountry, but no visibility beyond their immediate surroundings. I became a communications hub, relaying messages between groups who couldn't reach each other directly. With each new contact, I added to my map, creating a living document of the apocalypse from my bird's eye view. Secure locations, danger zones, resource caches. I meticulously logged survivor movements and infected migration patterns. The more I watched, the more patterns emerged. The infected were leaving the cities. Food scarcity, perhaps, or some instinctual drive. They followed highways initially, then dispersed along smaller roads and trails. Their movement wasn't random. They followed stimuli, noise, light, movement. And they congregated. A dozen would become 20, then 50, drawn together by some shared impulse I couldn't understand. By day 15, I was coordinating movements for over 30 survivors in separate groups. My tower had transformed from an observation post to a tactical command center. The radio crackled constantly with updates, questions, desperate pleas for guidance. I slept in 20-minute increments between critical communications. The more people who knew about me, the more valuable my tower became. Valuable things don't stay secret long in this new world. Day 16 brought my first major failure. A group of 6 I'd been guiding toward a national park ranger station with reported supplies took a wrong turn. Either they misunderstood my directions or I misjudged their position. They walked directly into a red zone. Through my scope, I watched them run, scatter, fall. I heard their screams over the radio, then silence. I marked their last known position on my map with a black X, the first of many. I'd gone from someone who documented fires to someone who couldn't prevent them. The guilt burns just the same. That night, scanning frequencies, I picked up a new transmission, different from the desperate pleas and status updates I'd grown accustomed to. This was structured, intentional. A broadcast repeating on a 30-minute cycle. Attention survivors. The collective offers security, supplies, and organized defense at our compound. Follow these coordinates for safe harbor. All who arrive will be evaluated for admission. The strong survive together. I located their compound through my scope. An old lumber mill surrounded by makeshift walls. Sentries with rifles. Organized. Patrols. It looked secure, professional, too professional. Their broadcast continued with specific instructions for different areas, including routes I knew were currently overrun. They were filtering arrivals, sending the well-equipped through safe passages while the desperate took deadly risks. When I picked up a family group heading toward one of these deadly routes, I broke in on their frequency. This is the Watcher. The route you're following leads to a major infected concentration. Proceed 2 miles south to the creek bed for a clear path. A new voice cut in immediately. Male, authoritative. This is collective security. Who is this? Identify yourself. I maintained radio silence. The family changed course, as I'd suggested. "This is collective command to unknown broadcaster," the voice continued. "Your interference is not appreciated. All survivor guidance should be coordinated through proper channels." Proper channels. 3 weeks into the apocalypse, and someone was already establishing hierarchy, control. An hour later, the family made contact again on a different frequency. "Thank you, Watcher. We saw the horde you warned us about from the hillside. The collective's route would have led us right to them." "Stay on this frequency," I instructed. "The collective is monitoring their broadcast channel. And be careful. At their compound, they're selecting who they want to admit." Day 17 brought a new complication. A group I'd been guiding for 3 days made contact with another one I'd helped previously. They compared notes and realized I'd given them conflicting information about a supply cache at an abandoned gas station. I'd told the better armed group about it while directing the smaller family unit away, knowing there wasn't enough for both, and the family wouldn't have survived a confrontation. "You're playing favorites," the leader of the armed group accused over the radio. "Who gave you the right to decide resource allocation? In fire lookout training, they teach you to report facts, not interpretations. Smoke color, wind direction, flame height, not what you think might happen. But now I was making life or death decisions based on interpretations, judgments, guesses. From my tower, I could see everything, including the blood on my hands from decisions made at a distance. I was no longer just a witness. I had become judge, navigating who lived and who died. And somewhere out there, people were keeping score. By day 18, the collective had figured out my location. I spotted 3 of their scouts on the access road to my tower, studying it through binoculars. They didn't approach. The 24 infected now permanently camped around my tower base prevented that. But they observed, planned. I kept my movements minimal, lights off. But they knew someone was up here, someone with visibility and influence they didn't control. That evening, they broadcast directly to me. "Attention Tower Observer. This is Collective Command. We're aware of your position and your communications with survivor groups. We propose an alliance. Your observations, our resources, and manpower. Together, we can establish order in this region. Respond on this frequency to discuss terms." I didn't respond. But I didn't sleep either. Weather patterns follow predictable laws. So do the infected, I'd learned, and a storm of them was heading directly for my tower. The migration I'd been tracking for days was shifting, leaving the picked-over towns and heading deeper into the wilderness. Whether drawn by survivor activities or just following the path of least resistance, thousands of infected were moving through the valleys surrounding my position. I spent day 19 warning every group in my network, coordinating evacuations from projected hot zones, establishing new safe corridors. The map on my wall became a forecasting tool, predicting infected movement patterns the way I once predicted. Fire spread. Most groups heeded my warnings. Some didn't. I marked more black X's on my map. The collective made contact again. "Your silence is noted, Watcher. But things are changing. The horde is moving. You've seen it. We have the manpower to redirect them away from key areas, including your tower. Without cooperation, we can't guarantee whose territory they'll be guided toward." It wasn't a subtle threat. In fire tower training, they teach you that your tower is your lifeline. They never mentioned it could become your coffin. That night, a severe thunderstorm hit. The same one I'd been tracking when the world ended, now circling back through the mountain range. Lightning struck less than a quarter mile from the tower, vibrating the entire structure. The old radio antenna took a direct hit, frying the primary system despite the lightning rod. The solar panels suffered damage from wind-blown debris. I spent hours in howling wind and pouring rain attempting repairs with limited tools and parts. By morning, I'd managed to restore partial function to the radio, but several frequencies were lost completely. I couldn't reach the medical team, or 2 of the family groups. The military frequency I'd discovered remained viable, but no one was broadcasting. 15 years I'd maintained that equipment through everything nature threw at it. Turns out chaos is a harder storm to weather than any blizzard. The storm had another effect. The infected below my tower had scattered, driven by some primal instinct to seek shelter. For the first time in days, the base was clear. But the reprieve wouldn't last. They always came back, and in greater numbers. On day 20, I made the hardest call yet. The largest survivor group in my network, 27 people including children, was directly in the path of the migrating horde. They needed to move immediately, but the only clear path would take them through territory marked by the collective as restricted. I knew the collective had patrols in the area who would either turn them back into the path of the infected or force them to surrender resources and split their group for evaluation. I had maintained neutrality until that point, observing the collective but not directly opposing them. But these were lives at stake. Children. I made my decision. Proceed along the logging road to Broken Pine Junction, I instructed the group leader. Between midnight and 4 a.m., the collective patrol will be on the north perimeter. Move quickly and quietly along the south fence line. There's a breach in the chain link near the old processing shed. Once through, head due east to the river. Follow it north to the ranger outpost. That's inside their exclusion zone, the leader replied, tension evident in his voice. They've got shooters. Not tonight, I said. They've redirected forces to manage the approaching horde. 4 guards instead of 12 focused northward. Just stay low and quiet. I watched through my night scope as they executed the plan. The breach point was visible from my angle just barely. 27 people slipping through the fence in near total darkness. I counted each one, heart in my throat. When the last child was through, I finally breathed again. At dawn, the collective frequency exploded with activity. They'd discovered the breach, the tracks. They knew someone had passed through their territory, and they knew who had guided them. This is your only warning, Watcher. The now familiar voice of their leader stated flatly. Your tower is compromised. Your usefulness is at an end. We're instituting communications blackout protocols for all survivor groups in the region. Anyone found using unauthorized frequencies will be considered hostile. They were trying to cut me off, isolate me. And from what I could see through my scope of their increased patrol activity, they were partially succeeding. Several groups I'd been guiding regularly stopped responding to my calls. Others switched to pre-arranged emergency frequencies, limiting communication to absolute necessities. The loss of contact with most of my network coincided with the infected, returning to my tower base, more than before, nearly 40 at last count. And the migrating horde's edge was now visible from my western viewpoint, a mass of moving figures flowing like a grotesque river between the hills. The tower groaned beneath me, a metal shutter running through the support beams. The weight and constant pressure of the infected climbing, pushing against the structure, was taking a toll. I did a structural assessment, something we were trained to do after lightning strikes or earthquakes. The results weren't encouraging. Stress fractures in 2 of the main supports, compromised to the foundation bolts. The tower had been scheduled for maintenance that never came because the world ended first. The Forest Service engineers who built Echo Tower never designed it to withstand this kind of stress. Nothing breaks at once. It fails gradually. Then, suddenly, I was running out of options and time. Then, on the emergency band reserved for government communications, a new voice broke through the static. Echo Tower, this is Captain Ramirez, 10th Mountain Division Remnant. If you're receiving, respond on this frequency. Repeat, Echo Tower, please respond. I hesitated before responding to the military transmission. In the weeks since everything collapsed, I'd learned caution. The collective had taught me that organization didn't equal benevolence. But my options were dwindling with the tower's structural integrity. This is Echo Tower receiving. Identify authentication protocol, I replied, falling back on the emergency response training I'd received years ago. The voice came back immediately. Authentication Sierra Tango 17, Captain Elena Ramirez, Commanding Remnant Force Operating, from Firebase Granite, formerly Elk Ridge National Guard Armory. I recognized the location, 30 miles northeast of my position. I'd spotted increased activity there through my scope, but hadn't been able to confirm its status. Authentication acknowledged. This is Emmett Callahan, Forest Service Fire Lookout. Echo Tower. Nature of contact? We've been monitoring regional communications. Multiple survivor groups have referenced your observation capabilities and guidance. We're establishing a secure network of strategic assets. Your tower provides critical visibility for our operational planning. I weighed my response carefully. My tower is compromised. Structural damage from sustained pressure. Foundation instability. Infected concentration at the base, 40+ and growing. Hostile human faction aware of my position and actively working to isolate me. The collective, she stated rather than asked. We're aware of their activities. Problematic, but not our primary concern. The infected migration is the immediate threat. Our intel suggests it's one of the largest concentrated movements since the outbreak. We need your observations to confirm approach vectors and density. I gave her what she wanted. Detailed counts from each cardinal direction. Movement patterns, speed calculations, estimated time to key locations. The kind of systematic observation that had been my life's work before it became survival intelligence. That matches our projections, she said when I finished. Mr. Callahan, your position is now designated a strategic observation post. We're establishing regular communication, windows at 0600 and 1800 hours. Maintain records of all infected movement patterns. We'll dispatch an extraction team when conditions permit. Extraction? You're offering evacuation? Affirmative. Your observational skills and regional knowledge are assets we intend to preserve. But extraction requires planning given your surrounded position. Continue your observation duties. We'll develop an extraction plan. Hope is a dangerous thing when you're surrounded. It makes you take risks, sometimes necessary ones. Day 21 brought new information. Captain Ramirez revealed that military research had identified patterns in the infection that matched my observations but added critical details. The infected operate on basic sensory stimuli, she explained. Primary attraction hierarchies are auditory first, visual second, olfactory third. They demonstrate rudimentary pack behavior but no tactical reasoning. Most importantly, they're showing signs of deterioration. Older infected are slower, less responsive to stimuli. The virus burns them out eventually. This aligned with what I'd seen. The freshly turned were faster, more aggressive. The older ones, weeks into infection, were deteriorating visibly, less coordinated, sometimes stopping entirely until new stimuli triggered movement. We believe large hordes form because they're following each other's stimuli responses. Ramirez continued. Break the chain of stimulus, disperse the horde. We're implementing sonic diversion protocols along their projected path to redirect them away from surviving communities. I relayed this information to the survivor group still in contact with me. Knowledge was survival currency now. I added deterioration rates to my observation logs, noting how environmental factors, rain, terrain, temperature, affected infected mobility. The military listened to my findings with interest. For the first time since the outbreak, I felt my observatory skills directly saving lives. The collective remained a problem. Their patrols increased, especially along the perimeter facing the approaching horde. Through my scope, I watched them constructing barricades, digging trenches, not to eliminate the infected, but to redirect them. Their broadcasts continued, now with specific warnings about unauthorized survival advisors providing dangerous misinformation. On day 22, they initiated their plan. Using vehicles with speakers and flares, they began herding the infected away from their compound and toward the valleys where most independent survivor groups had established camps. It was deliberate, calculated. The infected migration that had been gradually spreading would now be channeled directly toward the most vulnerable. I broke my communication blackout to warn everyone on emergency frequencies. The collective is redirecting the horde toward Clearwater Valley and Pine Haven Camp. All groups in those areas evacuate immediately. I repeat, evacuate now. The collective. Commander cut in immediately. This is misinformation. We are implementing protected zones for all registered survivor groups. Report to collective checkpoints for evacuation to safe zones. They're lying, I broadcast. I can see their operation from my position. They're sacrificing independent groups to preserve their own resources. What followed was chaos. Some groups followed my warnings, others trusted the collective's organized response. I watched through my scope as people made decisions that would determine whether they lived or died. Some made it to high ground or defensive positions in time, others didn't. More black X's on my map. Captain Ramirez contacted me that evening. Your tower has been designated Priority 1 for extraction. The collective's actions have accelerated our timeline. Their redirection of the infected creates a tactical opportunity. We're mobilizing resources. What does that mean exactly? I asked. It means pack what you can carry and be ready to move on short notice. We have a narrow window before your position is completely overrun. The tower swayed slightly beneath me, another support beam groaning under strain. The infected count at the base had reached nearly 60. The constant pressure was accelerating the structural damage. I estimated 3 days at most before catastrophic failure. While waiting for the military extraction, I continued guiding the survivors still in contact with me. A family of 4 making their way to higher ground. A former park ranger leading a group of hikers through backcountry trails. 3 nurses transporting medical supplies between outposts. Each success felt like time bought. Each failure weighed like stones. On day 23, the first major support beam failed. The sound woke me from fitful sleep. A sharp crack followed, by the whole tower shifting 2 degrees off plumb. I could feel the floor's new angle beneath my feet. When I checked the structure, the damage was worse than I'd feared. One of the main corner supports had fractured. The tower was still standing, but the integrity was compromised beyond repair. I radioed Captain Ramirez immediately. Structural failure initiated. Tower now critically compromised. Estimate complete collapse within 24 to 72 hours. Understood. Extraction team is mobilizing now. ETA 18 hours. Maintain position and prepare for emergency evacuation. I spent the day methodically preparing. I filled my backpack with essentials: water purification tablets, first aid kit, knife, matches, compass, maps with my documented safe zones and danger areas, the most critical of my observation logs, my rifle and remaining ammunition. Everything else I'd leave behind. The infected below seemed to sense the tower's weakness. Their frenzy increased, pushing harder against the base. The structure continued to deteriorate, metal stress sounds becoming more frequent. That evening, Captain Ramirez made contact again. Extraction team deployed 6 personnel with aerial support. But we have a complication. The collective has established a blockade on the most direct approach to your position. They've made it clear they consider your tower their territory now. Their territory? I've been broadcasting warnings about their operations for days. They want me silenced. Correct assessment, which is why our extraction plan needs adjustment. The team will approach from the northwest under cover of darkness. They'll create a diversion to draw off the infected surrounding your base. When they signal, you'll need to descend and move quickly to the extraction point half a mile from your position. Half a mile through infected territory, after weeks of not setting foot on the ground. The prospect terrified me more than I wanted to admit. There's a problem with that plan, I told her. The tower staircase is retracted and damaged. Even if I lower it, the infected will swarm it immediately. I won't make it 10 feet. There was a long pause before she responded. Then we'll need to create a more substantial diversion. Stand by for updated extraction plan. The night passed slowly. The tower creaked and shifted beneath me, forcing me to redistribute weight around the cabin to maintain balance. I dozed sitting up, rifle across my lap. By dawn of day 24, the floor had developed a 7-degree tilt. Moving around the cabin required constant attention to avoid sliding. The infected count below had reached nearly 80. Captain Ramirez contacted me at exactly 6 in the morning. Extraction team in position. We've modified the plan based on your tower's condition. At 1900 hours, aerial support will initiate sonic diversion protocols 2 miles southeast of your position. This should draw the majority of the infected away from your tower. And if it doesn't work, it will work. It's been tested. But the window will be brief, 30 minutes maximum before they begin returning. The extraction team will deploy, To your position as soon as the path is clear. They'll bring rappelling equipment to get you down if the stairs are unusable. The tower might not hold that long, I warned. Then we'll adapt again, she said with military efficiency. Be ready. I spent those waiting hours saying goodbye to Echo Tower. 15 years, this place had been my sanctuary, my refuge from a world I'd never quite fit into. The irony wasn't lost on me that when the world became a nightmare, my sanctuary became a trap. At 6:30 in the evening, I spotted the military team through my scope. 6 figures in tactical gear moving through the forest with practiced efficiency. They established positions along the northwestern approach to the tower, hiding in underbrush and behind rock formations. I counted 3 snipers and 3 assault specialists from their equipment. More firepower than I'd seen since the outbreak began. At 7, exactly as promised, I heard the distant sound of military helicopters. 2 Blackhawks appeared over the southeastern ridge, flying low. As they passed 2 miles from my position, they activated what looked like mounted speakers. Even from my distance, I could feel the sonic pulses, low-frequency thumping that resonated through the tower structure. The effect on the infected was immediate and remarkable. They stopped their assault on the tower base and turned toward the sound. Within minutes, they began moving en masse toward the helicopters, which were now circling slowly, leading them away from my position. The team leader radioed me directly. Echo Tower, this is Extraction Team Alpha. Path clearing. Prepare for a descent. We'll reach your position in approximately 10 minutes. I watched through my scope as the infected horde followed the helicopters, emptying the area around my tower base. The plan was working perfectly. Then everything changed. A convoy of 3 vehicles appeared on the access road. Collective patrols. They must have been monitoring the military frequencies. They knew exactly what was happening and when. They positioned their vehicles between my tower and the approaching extraction team, setting up a hasty blockade. Collective forces interceding, I radioed to the team. 3 vehicles, approximately 12 armed personnel establishing blockade between you and the tower. The team leader responded immediately. Maintain position. We're reassessing approach. What followed was a tense standoff. The collective forces took defensive positions behind their vehicles. The military team remained hidden in the tree line. The infected continued being led away by the helicopters, their numbers dwindling around the tower. My window for escape was evaporating with each passing minute. Then the collective commander broadcast on an open frequency. Military forces, this is collective command. The observation tower is under our protection. The observer has been providing dangerous misinformation to survivor groups. He will be detained and debriefed, according to emergency protocols. Stand down and withdraw. The military team leader responded coolly. This is a federal extraction operation of strategic personnel. Your interference constitutes obstruction of emergency military operations. Stand down immediately. This territory operates under collective governance now, came the reply. Federal authority was dissolved when the government abandoned this region. Final warning. I watched the standoff through my scope, heart pounding. Neither side was backing down. And worse, the helicopters were reaching the end of their diversion route. Soon they'd have to break off, and the infected would begin returning. We'd all be overrun. The tower shuddered beneath me, another support giving way. The floor tilted further, now at nearly 10 degrees. Metal shrieked as bolts tore free from their moorings. I was out of time. Both forces, this is Echo Tower, I broadcast. The infected will return in approximately 15 minutes. The tower is critically failing. If either side wants what's in my head, all the safe zones, migration patterns, survivor locations, then this standoff needs to end now. For 10 excruciating seconds, nothing happened. Then 3 sniper shots cracked almost simultaneously. 3 collective fighters dropped. Before the others could react, the military team emerged from cover, weapons trained on the remaining collective forces. Lower your weapons or join the infected, the team leader ordered. The remaining collective forces hesitated, then complied, dropping their weapons. Echo Tower, path clearing now, the team leader radioed. Preparing for immediate extraction, I gathered my pack, took one last look around my home of 15 years and prepared to descend into a world I'd only been watching from above. The tower groaned beneath me, shuddering as another support beam gave way. The floor tilted sharply, sending items sliding across the cabin. The military team reached the base of the tower just as I was attempting to lower the damaged staircase. The mechanism jammed halfway, the metal stairs hanging at an awkward angle 20 feet above the ground. "Can't lower the stairs completely," I called down. "Mechanism damaged." "Stand clear of the entry point," the team leader shouted back. One of the soldiers fired a grappling hook that caught on the platform edge. 2 team members quickly ascended the line, carrying additional rappelling gear. They reached the platform just as the tower gave another lurch, tilting further. "Mr. Callahan?" one of them asked as they secured a harness around me. "That's me," I confirmed. "Captain Ramirez speaks highly of your observational skills. Let's get you out of here before this whole thing comes down." They attached my harness to their descent line and positioned me at the edge of the platform. Below, the other team members had secured the collective forces and were watching the perimeter for returning infected. "Ever rappelled before?" the soldier asked. "No. It's easy. We control the descent. Just keep your feet against the tower and walk down. We've got you." I took one last look at my cabin, my maps, my life's work. Then I stepped backward off the platform into open air. The descent was controlled chaos. My feet scrambled against the tower's metal frame while the soldiers expertly managed my descent rate. The ground rushed toward me faster than I expected. 15 years above the earth, and now I was returning to it in seconds. I landed with an ungraceful stumble, my legs wobbly on solid ground. One of the soldiers steadied me while the other team maintained a defensive perimeter. The 2 who had ascended the tower were fast roping down behind me. "Hostile forces contained," the team leader reported, gesturing to the disarmed collective members now zip-tied and seated against their vehicles. "But we've got incoming. The diversion is ending." Through the trees, I could hear them. The infected, returning, drawn back by the commotion or simply resuming their previous path once the sonic diversion ended. After weeks of watching them from above, the prospect of facing them at ground level sent ice through my veins. "Extraction vehicles. Inbound," a soldier reported, checking a tactical radio. 2 minutes out." "Too long," the team leader said, scanning the tree line. "We move now on foot. Rendezvous with vehicles at Checkpoint Bravo." The team organized with practiced efficiency. 2 point, 2 rear guard, 2 flanking me in the center. We moved rapidly through the forest, away from my tower and the approaching infected. I struggled to keep pace, my body unaccustomed to running after weeks of confinement in the small cabin. "What about the collective members?" I asked between labored breaths. The team leader's expression was grim. "Not our priority." I looked back over my shoulder. My tower stood silhouetted against the evening sky, listing visibly to one side. Around its base, the first of the returning, infected were appearing, drawn to the collective members' panicked struggles against their restraints. I forced myself to look away and keep moving. We reached a small clearing where 2 armored Humvees waited with engines running. The team loaded, efficiently, placing me in the center vehicle. "Echo Tower secure," the team leader radioed as we pulled away. "Asset recovered. En route to Firebase Granite." As we rounded a bend in the forest road, I caught a final glimpse of my tower through the trees. The infected had swarmed the base completely. The collective members were nowhere to be seen, and with a terrible groan audible even from our distance, the entire structure began to collapse, folding in on itself like a closing telescope. 15 years of my life disappeared in seconds, swallowed by the forest and the dead. The drive to Firebase Granite took nearly 3 hours, following circuitous routes to avoid infected concentrations and collective checkpoints. I spent most of it staring out the window, trying to reconcile the landscape with what I'd observed from above. Everything looked different from ground level, more immediate, more dangerous. Firebase Granite had been a National Guard armory before the outbreak. Now it was a fortified military outpost surrounded by concrete barriers, razor wire, and guard towers. Floodlights illuminated a cleared perimeter where nothing could approach unseen. After weeks of darkness and whispered radio communications, the operational activity was overwhelming. Captain Ramirez met us at the main building, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s with close-cropped hair and calculating eyes. She dismissed the extraction team with a nod of approval before turning to me. "Mr. Callahan, welcome to Firebase Granite. I'm glad the extraction was successful." "My tower collapsed," I said, still processing the loss. "But you didn't," she replied pragmatically. "And that's what matters. Your observational data and regional knowledge are far more valuable than the structure." She led me through the compound, explaining their operation. Approximately 60 military personnel and 40 civilians maintaining what she called strategic continuity of government and defense capabilities. They had limited but functional communications with other military outposts across the country, restricted vehicle operations due to fuel conservation, and a clear mandate: secure the region, protect surviving civilian populations, and establish foundations for rebuilding. "The infected aren't a permanent problem," she explained as we walked. "They're decomposing faster than they're reproducing. The virus burns through them. Every day we're seeing more immobilized due to advanced tissue deterioration. Our projections suggest the active threat will be manageable within 8 to 12 months. And then, reconstruction. But first, survival." She stopped outside a door labeled Tactical Operations, "which is where you come in." The room contained maps similar to what I'd created in my tower, but far more sophisticated. Digital displays showed infection density projections, communication. Stations monitored survivor frequencies. Personnel analyzed data and coordinated field teams. "We have satellites, drones, and ground recon," Ramirez explained. "What we lack is someone who understands this region intrinsically, someone who's been watching it transform day by day since the outbreak, someone the surviving communities already trust." I understood immediately. "You want me to coordinate civilian evacuations to your secure zones?" "Precisely. The collective has been spreading disinformation, positioning the military as either non-existent or hostile to civilians. They want control of survivor resources. We need to counter that narrative and establish legitimate safe zones before winter." Winter. I hadn't thought much beyond daily survival. But she was right. In the mountains, winter would be a death sentence for isolated survivor groups without proper shelter and supplies. "I'll need detailed maps," I said, already assessing the tactical displays. "Communication access to all frequencies I've been using, and honest information about your capabilities and intentions." She nodded approvingly. "You'll have what you need. Get some rest, we begin tomorrow." They gave me quarters, a small room with a real bed, working lights, and a shower with hot water. Luxuries unimaginable after weeks in the tower. I should have collapsed into exhausted sleep immediately. Instead, I lay awake, the silence deafening after so long, with the constant background noise of infected moaning and metal creaking. My mind raced with all the survivor groups I'd been tracking. Were they still alive? Could I still help them? Day 25 began with a full briefing. Captain Ramirez introduced me to her command staff and intelligence team. They presented their assessment of the regional situation. Approximately 12,000 infected in a 50-mile radius with major concentrations along former population centers and transit corridors. Survivor groups totaling perhaps 2,000 people scattered throughout the area, most unaccounted for in their census. The collective controlling a 10-mile territory centered on the lumber mill, with an estimated force of 300 armed personnel and 600 civilian dependents. They're establishing satellite outposts at these locations. Ramirez indicated several points on the map, forcing smaller survivor groups to either join them or evacuate. Their resource acquisition teams are stripping every supply cache clean. They're preparing for winter, I noted, centralizing resources. At the expense of anyone outside their hierarchy, Ramirez confirmed. We need to offer an alternative, legitimate safe zones with fair resource distribution. My role became clear quickly. I spent the day recording everything I knew about survivor locations, infection patterns, and resource caches. My memory of the landscape, honed by years of observation, proved more detailed than their satellite imagery. I knew which valleys would channel infected movement, which ridgelines offered defensible positions, which water sources remained uncontaminated. By evening, we had established 4 potential safe zone locations and mapped evacuation corridors for known survivor communities. I recorded broadcast messages that would go out on all frequencies I'd previously used, establishing authentication protocols so survivors would know it was really me. The Watcher is now working with legitimate military forces at Firebase Granite, the message explained. Safe extraction available for all survivor groups. Authentication protocols as follows. That night, I joined Captain Ramirez on the Firebase wall. The perimeter lights illuminated a clear zone around the compound where nothing could approach unseen. Beyond, darkness concealed both threat and promise. "You miss your tower," she observed. Not a question. "I miss the perspective," I admitted. "Being able to see everything, make sense of the patterns." "We'll get you that perspective back," she promised. "There's an observation post on the eastern ridge we've been developing. Not as high as your tower, but serviceable. Once we've stabilized the immediate situation, you can resume broader surveillance operations from there." The idea brought unexpected comfort. Perhaps my tower was gone, but my purpose remained. Day 26 brought the first responses to our broadcasts. 3. Survivor groups made contact, cautiously optimistic about military presence but wary of potential deception. I spoke with each directly, using personal details from our previous communications to verify my identity and situation. "Yes, it's really me," I assured a woman whose family I'd guided past an infected horde weeks earlier. "The military extracted me from the tower just before it collapsed. They're establishing secure zones for winter survival. I'm helping coordinate evacuations." "How do we know this isn't a collective trick?" she asked. "They've been broadcasting that they're the only organized force left. When I guided you past Miller's Ridge, you told me your daughter had lost her stuffed rabbit during the evacuation," I reminded her. "It was the only thing she'd brought from home. That's not something the collective would know." One by one, the groups I'd previously assisted began to trust my new position. We organized extraction operations, sending small teams to guide survivors back to Firebase Granite or to the satellite safe zones being established. Each successful evacuation brought new information about conditions beyond our immediate reconnaissance range. The collective responded predictably. Their broadcasts became increasingly hostile, warning survivors against military imposters and collaborators. They established blockades on major evacuation routes, forcing our teams to develop alternative pathways. What had begun as a civilian protection operation was evolving into a territorial conflict. On day 27, the first major confrontation occurred. One of our extraction teams, escorting a group of 17 survivors including children, was intercepted by a collective patrol. The resulting firefight left 3 collective members dead and one of our soldiers wounded. The survivors were successfully evacuated, but the escalation was concerning. "They're getting desperate," Captain Ramirez assessed during our evening briefing. "Their winter preparation depends on controlling all the resources in the region. Every survivor group that chooses us over them undermines their narrative and their supply projections." That night, the collective launched their counteroffensive, not against the Firebase directly. They lacked the firepower for a direct assault, but against our credibility. They broadcast what they claimed was evidence that the military had caused the outbreak, that Firebase Granite was conducting experiments on survivors, that their community represented the only truly democratic governance in the region. More concerning were reports from our recon teams that collective patrols were actively herding infected toward our evacuation routes and satellite safe zones. They were weaponizing the dead against us. "We need to accelerate the evacuation timeline," I advised the command staff. "Winter's coming, and now we're fighting both the infected and the collective. We need to consolidate our resources and secure our positions before the first snowfall." Captain Ramirez nodded grimly. "Agreed. What do you need?" "The observation post you mentioned. I need to get back to higher ground, see the patterns forming. And I need direct communication with all field teams and survivor groups. By dawn of day 28, I was established in the new observation post. It wasn't my tower. Nothing would ever replace that vantage point. But the eastern ridge provided a clear view of critical areas. They'd equipped it with military-grade optics far superior to my old spotting scope, secure communications, and enough supplies for extended observation shifts. From this new perch, I watched as our operation expanded. Helicopter extractions for the most vulnerable groups, armed convoys, securing evacuation corridors, field teams establishing and supplying the satellite safe zones. The collective's attempts to interfere becoming increasingly desperate as their isolation grew. But I also saw the infected, still numerous, still dangerous, and increasingly concentrated, along the natural corridors we needed for evacuation. Whether by collective design or natural migration patterns, they were becoming a more immediate threat than ever. That afternoon, I spotted something concerning through the high-powered optics. A massive infected concentration was forming in the valley that separated our primary evacuation route from Firebase Granite. Hundreds, perhaps 1,000 infected, moving slowly but purposefully along the valley floor. And at the valley's edge, just visible at maximum magnification, collective vehicles with what appeared to be sound equipment. I radioed Captain Ramirez immediately. They're deliberately herding the largest horde I've seen directly toward our primary evacuation corridor. Current estimated time to intersection is 3 hours. We have 4 evacuation groups in transit along that route. Can they be redirected? She asked. I studied the topographical display. Not easily. The alternatives add significant time and hazards. The largest group has children and elderly. They won't make it before dark if redirected. Then we need to redirect the infected instead, she decided. Prepare sonic countermeasures. We'll deploy aerial assets to intercept and divert the horde. The operation that followed was the largest coordinated effort I'd witnessed since the outbreak. 2 helicopters deployed with mounted sonic equipment, creating a competing attraction to draw the infected away from the evacuation route. Ground teams established defensive positions along critical choke points. Extraction vehicles accelerated their timeline, pushing to reach the endangered groups before the infected could intercept them. From my observation post, I coordinated it all, tracking infected movement patterns and advising on tactical adjustments in real time. It was like watching a deadly chess game unfold, with pieces moving across the landscape in a lethal dance. The collective forces attempted to counter our sonic diversion with their own equipment, creating a disorienting confluence of attractions for the infected. The horde began to split, some following our diversion, others continuing along the collective's desired path. The situation grew increasingly chaotic. Primary group reached, came the report from the lead extraction team. Loading evacuees now, 23 civilians including 7 children. Infected approaching from southeast, I warned, tracking their movement through my optics. Estimated 3 minutes to your position. Acknowledged. Expediting loading. I watched tensely as the evacuation vehicles were packed with survivors. The infected vanguard appeared at the tree line just as the last civilian was secured. The convoy began moving, taking an alternate route I'd identified that would add time but avoid the main horde. Then disaster struck. One of the helicopters conducting sonic diversion suffered a mechanical failure. Its speakers cut out mid-operation, leaving a sudden silence that confused the infected below. The pilot maintained control of the aircraft but was forced to withdraw. Without the competing attraction, the infected began reverting to their previous course, directly toward our retreating evacuation convoy. Convoy under pursuit, the team leader reported. Infected closing from multiple directions. Request immediate support. Captain Ramirez's voice came through, clear and decisive. All available units converge on convoy route. Prepare for extraction defense. Mr. Callahan, we need an alternative path. Something they can reach before the infected overtake them. I scanned the terrain frantically, calculating distances, angles, terrain factors. There's an old fire road 2 miles ahead of their position. It connects to the northern approach to the fire base. Surface is rough but passable for their vehicles. It bypasses the main horde concentration. Relay coordinates, Ramirez ordered. I guided the convoy toward the fire road, watching through my optics as they raced against the pursuing infected. The lead vehicle reached the turnoff and navigated the steep entrance. The second followed. The third, carrying most of the civilians, struggled on the incline, wheels spinning in loose gravel. "They're stuck," I reported, throat tight. "Infected. Closing, less than quarter-mile behind. Diversion team deploy now," Ramirez commanded. A squad that had been positioned as backup ignited emergency flares and activated vehicle sirens, drawing many of the infected away from the stalled convoy. The diversion worked, but not completely. A smaller group of faster infected continued toward the vulnerable vehicle. Through my scope, I watched soldiers form a protective perimeter around the civilian transport, engaging the approaching infected with disciplined fire. The vehicle finally gained traction, lurching up the incline and onto the fire road. The soldiers maintained their position, holding off the infected as the convoy escaped. "Civilian transport clear," came the report. "Defense team now extracting." I kept my optics trained on the soldiers as they executed a fighting retreat, leapfrogging back to their vehicles while maintaining suppressive fire on the infected. They were professional, precise, but the infected kept coming, absorbing casualties without slowing. "Team, be advised," I transmitted. "Second infected group approaching from your west, cutting off your primary retreat path." "Acknowledged," the team leader responded calmly. "Adjusting extraction route." I guided them through an alternate path, watching as they narrowly evaded the converging infected groups. When their vehicles finally disappeared into the forest on a safe trajectory toward the firebase, I allowed myself to breathe again. By nightfall, all evacuation groups had reached safety, either the main firebase or one of the satellite safe zones. The cost had been high. 2 soldiers lost, several injured, vehicles damaged, and precious fuel and ammunition expended. But 23 more survivors were now secure. Captain Ramirez joined me at the observation post as darkness limited visibility to the immediate perimeter illuminated by the firebase lights. "Your navigation made the difference today," she said simply. "It was close," I admitted. "Too close. The collective is getting better at manipulating infected movement. They're learning." "So are we," she replied. "And tomorrow we implement Phase 2. "What's Phase 2? Her expression was grim, but determined. "Taking the fight to the collective. They've forced our hand. We can't continue evacuations with them actively endangering civilians and our personnel. Tomorrow, we neutralize their capability to interfere." I looked out at the darkness beyond our perimeter lights. Somewhere out there, the infected still wandered, the collective still plotted, and trapped between them, survivors still waited for rescue. "How many more days until winter?" I asked. "First snow projected within 2 weeks," Ramirez answered. "Hard freeze shortly after. Why?" "Because I've watched this region for 15 years. When winter hits these mountains, everything changes. Nothing moves. Nothing survives without preparation. We're running out of time." She nodded grimly. "Then we better make every day count." By day 29, the full scope of our conflict with the collective had become clear. Captain Ramirez briefed me on their intelligence assessment while we studied maps in the command center. "They have approximately 70 armed personnel actively interfering with our evacuation operations," she explained. "Another 100 providing compound security. Their leadership structure consists of a core group of 7, led by this man." She indicated a photograph of a stern-faced former corporate security executive. "Martin Decker, ex-military, ex-private security contractor. He's established what amounts to a feudal system, with his security personnel as the privileged class and all other survivors serving their needs." "How many civilians under their control?" I asked. "At least 600. Most not by choice. They control food distribution, shelter, and protection. Anyone who doesn't conform to their system is expelled." "Expelled? Into infected territory?" She nodded grimly. "Precisely. We've recovered several such expellees during evacuations. Their testimonies are concerning. Forced labor, resource hoarding, Punishment for dissent. They're building something that looks less like a survival community and more like an authoritarian microstate. I studied the tactical display showing collective outposts and patrol patterns. They're struggling to maintain control of their expanding territory. Overextended. That's why they're so aggressively opposing our evacuations. Every survivor who chooses us over them undermines their power base. That's our assessment as well, Ramirez confirmed, which is why today's operation targets their ability to project force rather than their central compound. The plan was precise and strategic. 3 teams would simultaneously strike collective outposts that had been established to block evacuation routes. A 4th would neutralize their mobile sonic equipment used to herd infected. None would target civilians or the main compound itself. We're not fighting a war against survivors, Ramirez emphasized. We're removing obstacles to evacuation and civilian safety. I observed the operation from my ridge post, providing real-time intelligence on collective movements and infected concentrations. The military teams moved with practiced efficiency, encountering less resistance than anticipated. Many collective enforcers surrendered when confronted with superior training and equipment. By mid-afternoon, all 4 objectives had been secured. 7 collective members killed, 23 captured, the rest retreated to their main compound. All our sonic diversion equipment was now operational, giving us control of infected movement patterns along major evacuation corridors. The collective's response was immediate. Their leader Decker broadcast on all frequencies. This unprovoked military aggression confirms what we've been warning. Government forces are not here to protect survivors, but to control them. Firebase Granite is not a safe zone, it's a concentration camp. All survivors should avoid military contacts and report their locations to collective protection forces. It was desperate propaganda, but concerning nonetheless. If survivors believed it, they might hide from our extraction teams, or worse, walk into collective ambushes thinking they were being rescued. I requested permission to broadcast a response, which Captain Ramirez granted immediately. This is Emmett Callahan, formerly of Echo Tower, now working with legitimate military forces. At Firebase Granite, I began. I've been observing this region since day 1 of the outbreak. I've guided many of you to safety. I've witnessed the collective herding infected toward evacuation routes and survivor camps. I've seen them block escape paths and confiscate resources from vulnerable groups. I'm now working from a secure observation post, continuing to monitor the region and coordinate evacuations. Firebase Granite is offering sanctuary, medical care, and fair resource distribution to all survivors. Winter is coming. We have secure facilities, supplies, and protection. If you can hear this, contact us on emergency frequencies for evacuation assistance. I added authentication details that survivor groups would recognize, information that only the real watcher would know. It was the best I could do to counter the collective's disinformation. That evening, Captain Ramirez informed me that our broadcast had generated responses from 8 previously uncontacted survivor groups. Field teams were already being organized for their extraction. But the weather forecast was concerning. Cold front moving in faster than predicted. The first snow might arrive within days rather than weeks. We need to accelerate again, she concluded. How many more groups do you estimate are still out there? I studied the maps where I'd been, marking known and suspected survivor locations. Based on radio transmissions and observed activity, at least 15 distinct groups, potentially 200 people, maybe more. And we have 4 days before weather compromises evacuation operations, she stated flatly. We need to prioritize. The implications were clear. We couldn't save everyone before winter. Some would have to shelter in place with supply drops until conditions improved. The question became, who gets immediate evacuation and who waits? Groups with children, elderly, or medical needs get priority, I decided. Groups in secured structures with winter capabilities get supply drops and defensive support. Anyone in direct collective threat zones gets immediate extraction regardless of composition. Ramirez nodded approval. Logical triage. Mark your recommendations on the map, and we'll deploy accordingly. Day 30 dawned clear and cold. Frost covered the observation post windows, the first sign of winter's approach. I'd spent the night mapping evacuation priorities and planning extraction routes that minimized both infected and collective exposure. The operation would require every available vehicle and team working continuously for the next 72 hours. I was reviewing final plans when the radio crackled with an emergency transmission. One of our recon teams monitoring the collective compound reported unusual activity. Massive mobilization in progress. All collective vehicles being loaded. Civilians being assembled in Central Yard. Something big is happening. I relayed the information to Captain Ramirez, who joined me at the observation post with her intelligence officer. Through high-powered optics, we observed the collective compound. The recon team's assessment was accurate. They were loading vehicles, gathering people. Evacuation? Ramirez suggested. No, I disagreed, studying their patterns. The vehicles are being loaded with equipment and armed personnel, not civilians. The civilians are being gathered but not boarded. This looks more like a major operation preparation than an evacuation. The intelligence officer concurred. They're mobilizing for something. Question is what? We didn't have to wait long for an answer. Decker broadcast again, his message chilling. Attention all survivors. The military occupation forces have demonstrated their hostile intentions against civilian governance. The collective has attempted peaceful coexistence, but aggression cannot go unanswered. As of now, all territories between the former Echo Tower site and Firebase Granite are declared collective security zones. Any military personnel or collaborators found in these areas will be considered hostile combatants. All survivors must report to collective checkpoints for registration and protection. Resistance will be considered alignment with military aggressors. What he didn't say, but what was immediately clear to us, was that the collective was expanding their territory to cut off all remaining survivor groups from potential evacuation. They were creating a cordon between us and the people we were trying to save. They're desperate, Ramirez assessed. They've lost outposts, equipment, and personnel. Their control is slipping. This is a last attempt to consolidate power. We need to broadcast an immediate warning to all survivor groups in the affected areas, I urged. Tell them to either move immediately toward the firebase or maintain complete communications blackout and concealment. While Ramirez implemented the warning broadcast, I continued monitoring the collective mobilization. Their convoy departed. The main compound heading northwest, directly toward 3 known survivor settlements we'd planned to evacuate later that day. They're going after the Thomas Creek community first, I reported, identifying their route. 27 survivors, including children. Minimal defenses. They've been in radio contact with us about evacuation. How soon can extraction teams reach them? Ramirez asked her operations officer. Nearest team is 40 minutes out. Collective will beat us there by at least 15 minutes. I studied the map, searching for options. There's another way. The Creek community has a defensive fallback position in the old fire watchtower on the ridge behind their settlement. It's not tall like my tower was, but it's stone construction defensible. If they retreat there immediately, they can hold out until our teams arrive. Ramirez nodded. Make the call. I contacted the community leader directly. Thomas Creek, this is the Watcher. Collective forces inbound to your location ETA 20 minutes. Implement immediate evacuation to your ridge fallback position. Military extraction team en route. Do not engage collective forces. I repeat, withdraw to fallback. Position immediately. Acknowledged, came the tense reply. Beginning evacuation now. Through my optics, I watched as the small community mobilized with practiced efficiency. They'd prepared for this possibility. Within minutes, they were moving up the forested ridge toward the old stone fire watchtower. Most made it before the collective vehicles arrived. 3 stayed behind as a rear guard, laying improvised caltrops to slow vehicle pursuit. The collective forces arrived at the now empty settlement and immediately began a sweep of the buildings. When they discovered the community had evacuated, they attempted to pursue up the ridge. The caltrops damaged 2 vehicle tires, temporarily halting their advance. By then, all community members had reached the watchtower and barricaded themselves inside. Our extraction team arrived 30 minutes later, approaching from the opposite side of the ridge. They secured a perimeter around the watchtower and coordinated with the community leaders for evacuation. The collective forces, now repaired and mobile again, attempted to interfere but were driven back by suppressive fire from our team's superior positions. Thomas Creek Community Secure, came the report. All civilians accounted for, beginning extraction to Firebase Granite. One crisis averted, but the collective convoy had split, with other elements heading toward different survivor communities. We spent the next 6 hours in constant communication with field teams, coordinating defensive positions, extraction routes, and diversion tactics. Some groups we reached in time. Others were forced to hide and await extraction under cover of darkness. By nightfall, the situation had evolved into what Captain Ramirez bluntly called open territorial warfare. The collective had established blockades on major routes. Our teams were engaged in periodic firefights to secure evacuation corridors, and caught between us, survivor communities were making desperate choices about who to trust. The infected, meanwhile, continued their mindless wandering, indifferent to human conflicts yet inevitably drawn to the sounds of struggle. Several skirmishes between military and collective forces were cut short when infected hordes, attracted by gunfire, converged on battle positions. In a grotesque way, the dead were becoming the peacekeepers of the apocalypse. As darkness fell on day 30, I took stock of our progress. 9 survivor groups successfully evacuated to Firebase Granite or satellite safe zones. 3 in transit, under military escort. 7 still awaiting extraction. 4 uncontacted but suspected based on previous intelligence. And an unknown number too frightened or suspicious to respond to any broadcasts. The temperature was dropping rapidly. The meteorological equipment at the observation post registered 27 degrees, below freezing. The first light snow began falling around 10 in the evening, earlier than even the accelerated forecast had predicted. Winter was arriving ahead of schedule, as it often did in these mountains. I gazed out at the swirling snowflakes illuminated by the observation post's exterior lights. In the forest beyond, shapes moved, infected, still mobile but noticeably slower in the cold. Their deterioration was accelerating with the dropping temperature. By full winter, many would be immobilized completely, frozen in place until spring, thaw. Nature itself would contain what humanity couldn't. Captain Ramirez joined me for the night's final assessment. Weather's turning faster than anticipated, she noted. Evacuation operations will be compromised by morning if this continues. Then we focus on supply drops and defensive support for groups that can't be extracted immediately, I replied. Prioritize cold weather gear, fuel, ammunition. Help them shelter in place until conditions allow extraction. She nodded agreement. And the collective. They're facing the same constraints we are. The weather will confine them to their compound and nearest outposts. The difference is they've been hoarding resources rather than distributing them. They've concentrated their population without adequate infrastructure. Winter will hit them, harder than it hits us. You sound certain of that assessment. I gave her a grim smile. 15 years watching these mountains through every season. Winter doesn't care about human conflicts. It's the great equalizer. The prepared survive. The unprepared don't. She considered this. Then we focus on preparation. For our people and for those we haven't reached yet. The final day of my first month in the apocalypse was defined by urgency accelerated by deteriorating weather. The light snow had continued through the night, accumulating to 3 inches by dawn. Field teams reported increasingly difficult terrain conditions. Vehicles struggled on unpaved roads. Infected moved more slowly but remained dangerous. We implemented the contingency plan for groups that couldn't be extracted immediately. Helicopter drops of essential supplies to secured locations. Detailed survival instructions transmitted on secure frequencies. Defensive perimeter recommendations based on my knowledge of the landscape and infected behavior patterns. The collective, as predicted, had pulled back most of their forces to their main compound and nearest outposts. Their attempt to establish a territorial cordon had failed, undermined by weather, military resistance, and their own overextension. Their broadcast became increasingly erratic, mixing threats with desperate appeals for specific supplies, medicine, fuel, cold weather, gear. Their hasty expansion had left them unprepared for winter's early arrival. By mid-afternoon, the snow was falling heavily, 6 inches accumulated, and more coming down. Field teams were recalled to Firebase Granite or nearest safe zones. Evacuation, operations transitioned entirely to emergency response only. The mountains were shutting down as they did every winter, indifferent to the human drama playing out across their slopes. In my observation post, I maintained communications with survivor groups now implementing shelter-in-place protocols. The familiarity of the work, monitoring, advising, observing patterns brought a strange comfort. The view was different, the stakes higher, but the essential task remained the same: watch, report, protect. Captain Ramirez arrived with a final situation report as darkness fell. Outside, the snow continued, silent and relentless. All field teams accounted for, 147 civilians, safely evacuated to Firebase Granite, 63 at satellite safe zones, supply drops completed for 9 shelter-in-place groups, 3 uncontacted groups still outstanding. And the collective? Maintaining defensive posture at their compound, minimal external activity. Intel suggests internal resource disputes escalating. They expanded too quickly, compromised their winter preparations. I nodded, unsurprised. They'll fracture from within before spring. Your assessment on our overall situation? She asked. I considered the question carefully. We've established a foundation, secure zones, supply chains, communication networks. We've saved more lives than I thought possible 30 days ago. When I was watching from my tower, I thought I was witnessing the end of everything. Now I realize I was watching the beginning of what comes after. She smiled slightly. Poetic assessment for a military situation report. I spent 15 years watching these mountains, I replied. You start to think in longer cycles, seasons, transformations. What burns eventually regrows. We stood in silence, watching the snow transform the landscape. Already the forest looked different, softer, quieter, the contours changing under the growing blanket of white. The infected visible near the perimeter moved sluggishly, some already motionless, in deepening drifts. We're establishing a permanent observation network, Ramirez said finally, combining traditional watchtowers with modern surveillance, creating a buffer zone between survivor communities and remaining infected concentrations. We need experienced observers to coordinate the system. I understood the offer. Back to what I know best. With improvements, she added. No more isolation. Proper rotation schedules, team support, regular supply lines. You'd be training others in your methods while helping design the entire regional surveillance infrastructure. I thought about my tower, now collapsed and abandoned. About the week spent watching helplessly as people died below. About the surprising purpose I'd found in guiding survivors to safety. It wasn't the life I'd chosen before the world ended, but perhaps it was the one I needed now. I'll need a higher observation post than this, I said, indicating the ridge. Location. Something with better visibility of the northern valleys. She smiled, recognizing acceptance. We'll build it. And unlike your old tower, this one will have reinforced foundations. It won't fall. As the snow continued through the night, I cataloged everything I'd witnessed in the 30 days since the world ended. The horror and chaos of those first days, the desperate struggles of survivors, the emergence of new powers like the collective, the resilience of those who adapted, the crucial importance of seeing the larger patterns that individual survivors on the ground couldn't perceive. For 30 days, I watched the apocalypse unfold from the safety of my tower. I documented humanity's darkest moments and unexpected courage. I guided strangers through hell using only my voice and my eyes. I thought isolation had prepared me for the end of the world. What it really prepared me for was its rebirth. Echo Tower is gone now, but what I saw from it, both the horror and the hope, that stays with me. They've built me a new observation post here at the compound. Not as high, not as isolated, but every morning, I still climb up and scan the horizon. Old habits die hard. After all, someone still needs to watch for what's coming. And if there's one thing a fire lookout knows, it's that there's always another storm on the horizon. But now, I'm not watching alone.